Welcome to the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Rick Prince, and I have the pleasure of having Brant Stachel on our podcast today. Brant is a running and triathlon coach. He's a licensed psychotherapist as well as a mental performance coach. So, Brant, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rick. This is awesome. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah. So, Brant, before we get into sort of the meat of the podcast, I was wondering, I was like, obviously, I gave a little bit of a background, but if you could delve into your background a little bit more for our listeners.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it, condensed here so we can get into the good meat stuff. But yeah, I used to coach at a pretty high level up in Canada, represented Canada a couple times as a coach. I've had, I think, over 25 athletes now represent Canada, everything from 800 to the marathon, all the way up to world champs. And so that's kind of the coaching pedigree, so to speak. And then, since the COVID pandemic, I did a master's in psychology or psychotherapy, rather, sorry. And since then, I've been working with athletes in two domains: eating disorders and then sport performance. And they tend to go hand in hand, at times. But really, my entire clinical practice is how do we make athletes, reach their goals in a way that's, my fundamental principles are that they need to be happy, healthy, and fast, right? In that order. And so that's kind of the ethos of what I do. So I'm pumped to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that progression because I think a lot of those first few steps often get left out of the equation when it comes to
Yeah.
coaching and just athletes in general when they think about performance. So I think that's a very cool perspective to have on that.
Yeah, well, it's one that's certainly blended across years of probably doing it wrong and not doing it the right way and learning,
Right.
as we all do. And then just, getting to be around so many top people, you start to see all these like congruencies and similarities that you pull from, whether it's, top US, women in the marathon or Canadians or 800 or 15. And the one thing I noticed all the time is like, if athletes aren't happy and they're not excited and they're not having fun, they don't run well. And I
Mm.
think we can do that as coaches. I try to do that in my mental performance world. I tend to bring humor into things so we can have fun. So I'm sure I'll have some bad jokes as we go through on this one too. Uh, but I find that's a really fun way to engage with athletes, connect with them, ensure they're having fun. Like what we do as runners, whether you're at top level or just getting into it, it's bloody hard all the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
And there's days that are easy, but there's days that are hard, right?
Yeah.
And the more fun we can have, that's why community is so great. That's why like connections like this are so great. People can plug in a podcast while they run and maybe listen to us talk, right? But I found that like the root of that is that we have to have some joy in our practice, right?
Yeah.
So I try to mimic that in what I do when I talk to athletes as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. We had Lawrence Van Lingen on not too long ago, who's a running well, he's sort of just a, I guess, human performance specialist, but he sort of
Yeah,
focuses on working with a lot of elite runners and triathletes. And that's sort of his whole genesis is that, you have to be in the right place mentally and feeling good and all this to be able to perform. And he says, the difference between people in a bad space versus a good space, for lack of a better word, in their
yeah,
performance is just it's just insane. It makes such a difference.
absolutely. One of the things I talk to athletes about all the time when they ask about like mental performance services and things like that is, in the running world in particular, my stuff is not going to bring your physiology up, your lactate threshold up, your VO2 max up, whatever, metric you want to look at, right? But what it will do is allow you to maximize what you have there, right? And I think
Yep.
that's the cool thing that I get to do in this world when I'm not having my coaching hat on, is really help athletes maximize what their ability and potential is, right? Versus having that unhealthy relationship with running, unhappy, bad thoughts, and then maybe be operating subpar to what their actual abilities are, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's a really cool match when we can do that. And it's so fun to see. I love getting, pictures and videos and messages post race of my athletes being like, I crushed it. And they're so happy and excited. And it's so fun to see. It brings me so much joy.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so fulfilling.
Ah, yeah.
Um, so getting into the meat of it, so this podcast will largely kind of discuss, you said it all sort of correlates, but certainly around the eating aspect. Um, disordered eating, I think, is becoming more of a topic these days, both in terms of just the general public as well as athletes. So what exactly is eating? What does it encompass? What is it? So on and so forth.
Yeah, I thought about this question. It's a really hard one to answer. I could look at it from the clinical lens and give you like the DSM-5 like clinical type definition, but I don't think that's the best way to go. I think one way. that we can view it is any type of eating pattern that in the short, medium, or long term is having negative effects or changing your relationship with food and or your movement practice.
Okay.
And why I think that's a better way to look at it is because, you know, it's so hard now. Like healthy eating is obviously good for us, but now we have orthorexia, right? Which is the fixation on healthy eating, right? We obviously know the two big ones, right? Bulimia, where you have purging type behaviors, and anorexia, where you're essentially under eating to a significant value. There's no cutoff, right? But within the anorexic slant, that there's multiple different little offshoots. Is it about body composition? Is it about the horse jockey problem, wanting to be lighter to be faster, right? Is it about fear of foods, right? And so it's really hard to kind of nail that down. And so while there's like patterns that are kind of assigned to each, even when I look at it through a purely clinical lens, like if I were to have somebody come to me with anorexia nervosa, there's different threads that might be the cause and the idea with it. So,
Mm.
broadly, I would say it's any time that you have some sort of maladaptive relationship with food.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, yeah, I can imagine it gets really complex really quick. Um, got it. So, and I think you're in a really unique position given what you do clinically as well as what you do, when you have your coaching hat on, as you mentioned. Do you think that endurance athletes sort of have an increased chance for having an eating disorder? And maybe is it due to maybe some of the things you said? They want to have the lower weight, so they have a better power to weight ratio. They just want to look like an athlete. What do you think there is there?
I think there's a lot. And the first way that I break it down is I look at like personality traits, right? So those who are higher in like negative emotion, like neuroticism, which, probably most of you listening, oh yeah, I love the numbers and I love analyzing and all that thing, right? If you're higher in neuroticism, you tend to be a little bit more prone to these type of behaviors.
Okay.
So that would be looking at it from a personality perspective. And once again, as I said, there's multiple threads to each of them. There is that idea of, well, if I'm lighter, I'll go faster, right? It's like, if I'm not saying this is correct, but for the analogy, if you drop a Corvette engine in a Prius, it's going to move a little bit faster than the hybrid engine
Sure.
got in it, right? Now, why I like that analogy, because everybody goes, oh yeah, I can go fast, right? And then I go, yeah, for a moment until you rip the chassis in half and you break up the car and you're no longer running, right?
Right.
It sounds
Right.
great, but the ramifications downstream are bad, right? And so I think there's that part of it. I think the other piece when I talk to younger girls and women in particular is that they look up and they see these pro women, right? With or without eating disorder. I'm not passing judgment here. But they've been doing it for decades largely, right? And so we know from a training perspective, like the more you train, the more your body changes and adapts, whether it's from a performance perspective, weight perspective, body composition perspective, it doesn't matter, right?
Hmm.
I think what happens is drive becomes so high, and they go, well, if that's how these people are running fast, then that's how I have to look to run fast. So
Sure.
it becomes this like bad like reward signal. And then what happens is it is like the deal with the devil. At first you get faster, and then it's like, woo, dopamine reward. I got faster for the behavior I did,
Yeah.
right? Then it's like, well, I got to continue that if I want to get faster, boom, boom, boom. And one thing that I changed in my language as a coach when I started working with this a little bit more is, and we've all done it, and I'm telling you, I've been guilty of it before without knowing, is athlete finishes a race and things are going well or a great workout, and you just say, whatever you're doing is working, keep it up, you're doing so great.
Mm.
But if I don't know that maybe they're under fueling, under recovering, you know, I just gave them a subliminal thumbs up to what they were doing,
Yeah,
right?
that's interesting. That's a great point.
So there's a lot of mechanisms within this, right? And you can look at it from a trauma lens too. Like, I have a handful of collegiate age women who maybe parent got sick, they've moved away to school changes big, they've had something else go on in their life, and they sought out like a form of control, right? And so it can be any or all of those or anything else too, right? And so, I try to paint that picture broadly because I want people to understand that it's not just about being lighter. It's not just always about performing. That might be the end goal. I'm not saying it's a good goal for those listening, those in air quotations, but it's not a great goal to have. But it sometimes ends up being the end order objective of a behavior that started maladaptively.
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha. I also think, do you think too that, certainly a lot of, us age groupers or like myself, we look at the pros and we're like, wow, I wish I could run or ride or swim that fast, and they see them at their, however lean they are. And do you think it sort of happens, sort of, well, relatively innocently, right? Like, hey, I want to be that fast. I want to be, lean like that. And they see the power numbers the pros put out or, the speeds, and they just sort of, they start doing it. And then all of a sudden, it becomes this full on type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I use this analogy in my clinical practice all the time that we as athletes are really bad at math, despite being like
Mm,
numbers people. And what I mean by that is not math exactly as in terms of like pace per kilometer or power or whatever, but just simple algebra. Like we tend to go for single variable analysis as athletes. So we tend to go, oh, look, so and so ran X pace and they look like that. Therefore, to
yeah,
look like that, I must, or to run like that, rather, I must look like that.
sure.
And so we take one variable. We solve 1 plus A equals 2 really simply, and we go, there we go. That's the answer to everything I needed to know, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, endurance sport is a multivariable analysis. And I don't know about you, I sucked at math. I ended it in high school. The 2 university credits I did were horrible, right? Once
Yeah.
I started adding multiple letters and signs and sigmas and all that stuff, I was gone, right?
Right.
But that's actually what we need to do as athletes. Because if I look at that athlete and go, so and so ran X pace, won X race, and look at their body, therefore I need to do that, right? That's the 1 plus A equals 2. Oh, I know that easily. 2 minus 1
Yeah.
is 1. There we go. That's the answer, right?
Right.
But what we don't look at and go is, okay, so they're 10 years in, right? They have a registered dietitian. They have a good relationship with food. They've adapted their body over a decade plus of training, right? They didn't seek out to have the body that looked like this. That's the response to the years of healthy training they've done.
Yeah.
Like, that's like 15 variables over 10 years. And I don't know about you.
Sure.
When I see a math equation of like A plus C minus 6 times Z plus 5 minus 9, I'm like, I don't know how to solve that. And I pass. And I just
Yeah.
go, 1 plus A equals 2. Done.
Yeah.
There we go. Right. And
Yeah.
you see that across our personalities as athletes all the time. Well, I could just buy the super shoe. I could just buy the disc wheel. I could get the speed helmet, right? If we're talking triathlon, or it's like I could just run the downhill marathon. It's like one variable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like if we expand that out a little bit, then what we get is actually sustained, healthy success versus just one off.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. So putting on the coach hat, what are some signs, I would say, a decent amount, maybe the majority of the listeners of this podcast are coaches or at least aspiring coaches. What are some signs that coaches should be aware of when it comes to with disordered eating with respect to their athletes that they coach?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hard one because we're in this age and stage, so to speak, where I got to caveat this, I should say. Food allergies and such are real. I don't want to deny that fact. But we're in an age and stage now where we read something, see something, think something, saw a pro, did something, ate something, didn't eat something, and we go, oh, that's going to help my performance. And then we start to form that belief, right? So I'll give
Hmm.
you an example. If you go to I'm just going to say South America on a hiking trip in Peru for 3 weeks and you don't touch milk, right? And then you come back to the US and you have milk, it's probably not going to go well for a day or two, right? That
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have a food allergy. It just means that the lactase dehydrogenase in your body has been down regulated, right? And so oftentimes we'll take noise like that and think it's signal, right? So I want
Yeah.
to preface that.
Sure.
So it becomes really hard for coaches because we don't want to overstep, right? And also, if we're not educated and understanding, we might take the wrong stance on this. Also, culturally, like I got athletes from different cultures who are like, I just don't eat that, or like
Yeah.
protein's not big in our culture. I'm like, fair enough. Like, I'm not going to tell you should have more protein
Right.
because you don't, you have disordered eating, right? So
Sure.
it's a bit of a lens there. But like to answer that question a bit more directly, and I'm not trying to dodge it, things that you might look for or hear from a coach, depending on how close your coach athlete relationship is, like, I'm always tired, or like I'm anxious that our group wants to go out for dinner before the race, or I don't feel like I'm recovering well. Right. I'm always feeling burnt out and fried. And, to be clear, there's a handful of questions: work, family life. We're not all robots who just run. I wish we could be, because that would be really fun, I suppose, for some people. So things like that are kind of like a gauge into it, right? Or the new one now, I would say, is a signal that I look at is, we're in the high carb revolution, right? In terms of like endurance sport right
Yeah.
now. So if you have somebody who's going, nah, I just don't want to like fuel that much. It's like, why? Right? Like, I mean, are you taking off your super shoes and not taking that 4% either? Right?
Yeah.
No? Oh, okay. Well, so there's something maybe a little bit more there. I want to
Yeah.
be clear. I'm not saying that these say, like signals are blatant. Yes, that person has an eating disorder.
Sure.
But I would say as a coach, that's a signal to me, maybe there's something there.
Yeah.
Right? So once again, don't like somebody says I don't want to fuel at 80 to 100 grams carbs an hour. I'd be like, aha, you have an eating disorder, go get help. Not what I'm saying. Right. But as a coach, that's maybe peeling back the onion a little
Right.
bit of getting to know that person. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that requires, if I put the coaching hat on, is us as coaches actually having coaching relationships with athletes, not just relationships with the spreadsheet and their data.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. You got to look at the whole athlete for sure.
Yeah.
So that progresses, I guess, to the next question. If a coach may have an eating disorder, how should the coach proceed? Like, what are the next steps? Like, whether it be the person they should recommend, maybe they go see. It was interesting. We collaborate with Dr. Justin Ross, who's a clinical to go see a therapist. It doesn't always. So I think, again, being able to stay in the coach for them to stay in their lane, and respect the scope of practice. What would you say? Like, what is something that myself as a coach could say to an athlete, or what should my steps be there?
Yeah, I think the first thing, obviously, there's education. Like, make sure you've got enough knowledge, like Red S, right? There's plenty of information
Yeah.
coming out about that right now. So understanding it, and then I think the first step, it's like we talk about in any other aspect of life that we're trying to bring to the light, is being open about it, right? So some coaches may not have expertise with eating disorders. They may not be trained. Like I'm in a weird spot that I'm a clinician and a coach, right? So I have this advanced training and knowledge. So you might not be there, but being able to be open and honest with your athletes if they're talking about those things and say, hey, look, I don't have full experience in this. I recognize that it's a problem and I want to make sure that you're in the best place you can be. Right.
Hmm.
So that's having a team of people you can refer to. Right. Like
Sure.
I can tell you that there are plenty of dietitians, psychotherapists, psychologists who specialize in this that would love to help your athletes and not see them go through the struggle of this. Right. And
Yeah.
so I think for coaches, building that community in the same way you find your chiros, your physios, your massage, your ATs, your osteos, whatever, your S&C gym, you find those in your community. I know we do that as coaches, right?
Sure.
We can do that here, building our team as well too. And so I think, bringing it to the light, talking about it, right? Not hiding from it, not ignoring it is the biggest thing we can do because, as athletes, we're only going to talk about the things we feel comfortable with, right? Like
Yeah.
I'll go a bit grotesque here, but we're runners, so we all know it's like if your coach doesn't want to hear anything about your bowel movements before a race or anything, you're never reporting on it, right? Or that you
Yeah.
have to stop or anything like that, right? And so it's the same kind of way with this stuff. It's kind of shameful and weird. Now in running, we have this weird niche where we love to talk about our bowel movements for some reason. I don't know where it came from, but it happens, right?
Right.
And so if we create that openness and honesty around this stuff, then we have great conversations about it. Like
Yeah.
I can tell you, I don't always know why you're having to stop and go to the bathroom 3 times in a marathon. Is it fueling? Is it nerves? Is it you have GI distress? Is it the wrong gel? Is it too little, too much? I don't know. Too much fiber the night before? Like there's a bazillion different reasons. I can't tell you that.
Yeah.
I'm willing to talk about it and figure it out and we'll try different things.
Yeah.
Right. I think we can do the same thing here where we open up that conversation, go, hey, like, Red S is a big thing. I don't know all the pieces that come into it. There's this like, circle with 7 different spokes that come off it. Right. I can't tell you all of those, even somebody who's trained in it right now. I got to go back and review it with my clients. Right. Um, but if we can have those conversations and athletes feel comfortable bringing that forward, they might not
Yeah.
know who to trust in the community as a registered dietitian or a psychotherapist or psychologist to go to. But you as a coach can and go, hey, I'm glad you came to me. You're experiencing this stuff. Here's where I can refer out. That's creating the awareness. That's creating trust as a coach, right? It's like liberating the athlete potentially, right?
Yeah.
From that feeling, right? It's focusing on the environment around athletes. We do that all the time. Hey, if it's hot out and it's humid, if you're on the East Coast like me, we pace adjust, right? We control for the
Yeah.
environment, right? Same as like I'm in Flagstaff right now. We control for the altitude in our paces. Hey, we can
Yeah.
reshape the surroundings and think about our environment for how we support athletes like this too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great, and it's something, it's weird. I never even really I never even really thought of that approach because I do think, if you don't have that openness where, athletes certainly don't feel comfortable talking about a variety of topics, then yeah, I guess when the coach mentions something about, whether it be eating or whatever, it looks like it just comes out of left field versus,
Yeah.
it's just organically happening in the conversation between the coach and the athlete. So I think that's tremendous advice. Um, so as a therapist who works with a lot of patients, or I don't know what the right term is,
Yeah,
clients
patience,
with
client, depends on the person. You're good. Yeah.
with eating disorders, do you also work closely with, say, registered dietitians, or is that sort of or how does that what does that look like?
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot of cross-pollination across our professions. And I do know registered dietitians that are also psychotherapists and psychologists as well. And
Hmm.
so, which is really cool to have both those lenses. And so I, for me, it's a little bit like client, patient, depending on the language you want to use, specific. Because the tricky part, if you have somebody who's really in the full like throes of an eating disorder, they know everything that nutritionist or dietitian knows. Like,
Hmm.
it's let's use like anorexia and like clean eating and under eating as an example here for this part of the conversation. It's not a nutrition knowledge problem. They know the calories and everything. They know the protein, they know the carbs, they know the fats, they know all of that, right? I want to be clear. I'm not saying that's the only thing
Yeah.
dietitians focus on, to be clear, to be fair to everybody, but it tends not to be a nutritional knowledge problem. It's a
Gotcha.
behavioral problem, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it falls into a little bit of my world. Now, there are people out there who just undereat or overeat or, have maladaptive eating patterns because they just don't have nutritional knowledge.
Hmm.
And that's when I find sometimes it's a little bit easier for like dietitians to step in and create that way. To be clear, I don't know every dietitian, I don't know every scope of practice that they have, and some of them do work really well with behavioral side as well too, right?
Yeah.
But we have slightly different scopes, slightly different lanes, I think,
Yeah.
but we do work collaboratively together for a lot of people.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's great information. Um, so if a coach thinks is that their athlete does have disordered eating or an eating disorder, where it's, especially if I think if it's, something that may borderline or be full on in a pretty severe type thing, but the athlete won't admit it or they won't discuss it, what's a coach to do about that? Because obviously as a coach you don't want to keep working with this person, right, and taking them down this, really really sort of dangerous path. So what might that have?
Yeah, I'll start by like stating that that kind of goes to your values as a coach first.
Okay.
And I'm not here to bash coaches or say some coaches are in it for this or that or anything. But as coaches, we have values and beliefs as to why we coach, right? Some of us might say like, "Hey, I'm here to coach you. That's completely out of my scope. That's your personal life. That's what you do." And to those coaches who don't have knowledge, okay, fair enough, right? My goal is always to share as much knowledge so coaches feel empowered as much as they can with information. And so
Hmm.
I hope that I give this through this conversation. But what I would say is like you can only offer and do so much. Okay. Right. I'm not saying these are parallel, but the example I use is if anybody has ever had the also unfortunate situation of having a family member who's an alcoholic or addicted to drugs, you can
Hmm.
only do so much to help them. Right.
Yeah.
That's a family member. Right. We're in the same position as coaches. I can't take you and drag you to see, somebody like me as a clinician and be like, here's what you have to do to keep running. Most of the people
Yeah.
we work with are adults, right? They get to make a decision. And so, my position has always been like, I will work with you if you're working to help yourself because I don't want to be the reason and the person here that you're coming and destroying your bone health, your potentially your cardiovascular health, fracture risk, all these things. I don't want to be a part of that game.
Yeah.
I want to be a part of your recovery and seeing you be the best version of self that you can be in as many aspects as you can. I'm not saying I control that or am leading in that direction, but I don't want to be part of the degradation of someone as a human, right? And I know
Yeah.
that's a weird juxtaposition because I take clients in on the clinical side who have eating disorders, but the ethos of that is trying to help them through it, right?
Sure.
So I carry that ethos over to running. I don't think in most cases, to be clear, we should just scrap running from someone who's struggling with an eating disorder. For some people, that might be the only 30 minutes, hour, whatever of their day where they have any joy or peace from what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't want to scrap that and tell them, nope, like you suck, you have an eating disorder, how dare you, you're not to run. But I want to make sure that they're being in the right direction on the health side and that
Yeah.
we're helping them and we're guiding them. And so I think for coaches, that's the ethos I try to push forward, where it's like, be there for them and support them, but also know where your values are in terms of how you feel about working with, athletes like that, and how you feel that you want to be perceived and delivered as a coach.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. Because I think it's interesting you said that about, you're not going to say, hey, don't run, right?
Mhm.
And I think, you hear that it tends to get injured a lot, when they go to like, I feel like doctors and physical therapists or runners almost never say don't run because they understand the psychology there, and maybe even if they say that, they know the runner will keep doing it. It's like, how can we best manage this? How can we reduce your load and still give you joy in your life because we know
Yeah.
this is your passion. So I think again, that holistic view of it, I think is so critical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's multiple layers to it too, right? So if you think about certain eating disorder typologies, they might actually eat less if they're not exercising because they're concerned about the calories in, calories out, right? You take
Okay.
that away, they might drop down even further. And then we might be
Gotcha.
going into like, the need for actual medical intervention, right?
Yeah.
I want to be clear, there are certain circumstances where we would take away movement if there's like severe cardiovascular problems or that increased risk of heart attack or stroke due to electrocardiomyography. Bone density that's so low that if they fall, they're like an osteoporotic, grandma who might break a back or something.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
those caveats. That's a very small subsection of the clinical population. But understanding, like you said, that point that, any coach, physical therapist who tells an athlete not to run knows that that athlete's probably not listening to them. They're
Yeah.
going to kick them out,
Right.
right? And so part of our goal is trying to navigate that. It's a little give and take, right? Because we have to remember we're dealing with adults and humans who aren't contractually obligated to listen to everything we say,
Yeah. Good
right?
point. Good
And
point.
so we have to be able to meet them where they are, right? We do that in coaching all the time. You get a new athlete, where's your training? You don't just come in with a wrecking ball and go, here's my style. You were running 20 miles, now you're running 50 miles.
Yeah.
We meet them where they are and we build, right? We find the next logical step for progression.
Yeah.
That's the same approach I do with my eating disorder clients.
Gotcha. You
Where
kind of
are
have to, right?
you? Yeah, you have to, right? Because like you need to have buy-in. The other thing I would say, and we see this a little bit in the running sphere, but more so in my psychotherapy services sphere, if you are the first person, like if you're the first coach or the first psychotherapist that an athlete sees, whether it's for running or psychotherapy services, and you don't meet them where they are and you screw them up and they have a bad experience with it, they're probably not coming back to coaching or psychotherapy. So we have a
Sure.
duty as coaches and psychotherapists to make that experience as great as possible so they stay with it. That's what we all want
Yeah.
as run coaches. I don't
Yeah.
want you to just one build. I want you to keep going and going and going and experience all the joys we get.
Yeah.
Same thing in psychotherapy. I just can't come in and be like, well, you're not eating, so here you go. You're only eating, just making up numbers here, 1,200 calories. You need to eat 2,000. If you're not doing that, don't bother working with me. It's like,
Hmm.
where are you at?
Yeah.
What can we make slow changes in? Create buy-in, create trust, right? Same way we do with running.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that most endurance athletes and most of the people listening on this podcast will agree that a lot of endurance athletes have type A personalities, right? I mean, you
Oh
almost
yeah.
have to some degree to, delve through all the numbers and train for an Ironman or marathon. Um, as such, do you find, again, maybe both in your coaching world as well as your psychotherapy world, that there's almost an sort of skews heavily with endurance athletes or more so than the general public towards addictive personalities. Um, you know, um, it's funny. We had our ultra running conference not too long ago last year, and I was just talking to some people there, and they were saying like, yeah, I know some people that used to be addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they've replaced it with ultra running.
Yep.
And again, I don't know if it's any more or less healthy when it comes to running like crazy stuff and doing stuff to the body, but what's your take on that as far as, I guess, for lack of a better word, exercise addiction, type A personality, and that correlation to endurance athletes?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, I'll just say this like from a like scientific kind of idea, and why I think more going to ultra than road is we there's a very well-known effect on the dopamine cycle of being outside and seeing nature and like non-constructed shapes. So we actually feel
Interesting.
more at peace and better. So like I'm looking at a window here and there's a pine tree with pine needles and it all goes off in different directions, right? That's more peaceful than to the eyes and the brain and the dopaminergic system than looking out and seeing a parking garage right there.
Yeah.
And so for somebody who may have had an addictive personality, be it to a negative substance or something else in life, who goes outside, right? Well, now they're getting more of these peaceful signals coming in, which brings them at ease,
Mm,
right? So I think that's my hypothesis. I don't have science on that, but that's my hypothesis why we're seeing more go to trails because they're getting this inherent positive feedback loop and
interesting.
running
Yeah.
through the concrete jungle of cities,
Right.
right? So I think that's part of it. And then on the type A type perspective, um, I have this saying I use. I got it from my amazing coach mentor that I had for 12 years when I was coaching in the university setting. Is that your biggest strength is your biggest weakness,
Interesting.
right? So type A individuals, like almost as you phrased it, it's not that it is, but it almost feels like it's a requisite to success in endurance
Correct.
sport.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying it is, to be clear, right? But it almost feels that way when we look at people,
Yeah.
right? But what we know, and I talking with a couple like very high level US women's marathoners while I'm down here in Flagstaff, they'll run through a brick wall. Every session you ask them, every weight room, everything they do, right? They also get injured fairly frequently.
Yeah.
Their biggest strength, their desire and ability to train, is what's holding them back. It's their biggest
Yeah.
weakness,
Yeah.
right? They're injured, so they can't be consistent, right? And so I think we have to look at that as athletes and coaches a little bit better, right? Like part of coaching and psychotherapy for that matter is knowing when to push and when to hold back. That's the art, right? No science can really tell us that yet, I suppose. Maybe the AI stuff can that I haven't played around with, but that's the art of coaching. That's the art of working with humans is knowing their personality and being able to go, hey, you trust me, right? You've brought me this goal that's the most sacred thing to you as your coach or psychotherapist. You trust me to guide you to that. You also have to trust me to hold you back here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think as athletes, if we can think through that, can my biggest strength is my biggest weakness? What's my biggest strength? I will make time. I will do it. I will do all the extra things. I'll do all those things, right? Okay, but how is that also harming me?
Hmm.
Assessed analytically. I won't miss anything, even if I'm sick and I have a lung infection and my shin's hurting, I'll get out there and all those things.
Yeah.
Maybe it feels good today, but what does that do in the moderate and long term? And
Yeah.
sometimes we can't measure that because sometimes just desire goes down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Right?
great perspective. And I've talked to quite a few coaches, especially to your point, those that work with, either elite and or high performing athletes. And they said, look, my job isn't to push these people. That's they got that. My job is to say, stop doing that. Like, don't do too much. Stop doing this on your rest day or whatever. It's really holding them back to so they can increase their performance, which is, you never really think of it in those terms, but I think with a lot of these high performing individuals that are sort of addictive, again, for lack of a better word, in nature, that is sort of the role, or that ends up being the role a lot of times for coaches.
Yeah, and there's this. I'll share this story. 'Cause I think it's cool. I'm a nerd, so maybe nobody else will. But I should also look up whether it's a parable or a fable. I'm not keen on learning the English language, but it's the farmer and the horse. Have you heard that one?
I don't know if I have. I don't
Okay,
think
I'll
so.
explain it for the listeners because it's really cool, and I'll give you
Yeah.
a real life example of it. So, um, the parable, fable, whatever the story. We're going to say story, narrative. What it is that it's like 150 years ago, let's say, right? A farmer's out in the woods and he finds this horse, and he brings it back to his farm, and his neighbor goes, "Oh, that's amazing! You got a free horse." And the farmer goes, "We'll see." So the next day, his son, who's his right hand man on the farm, right, is out trying to break in the horse. Horse bucks him off. Son breaks his leg. Neighbor comes by and goes, "Oh, that's horrible. Your son, like, you're not gonna be able to harvest and all these things, right?" And the farmer goes, "We'll see." Right. The next day, the army comes for mandatory conscription. They can't take his son because he's got a broken leg. "Oh my God, you're so lucky," the neighbor says. "I don't know. We'll see." Right. And so what that highlights is we don't know beyond usually the first order, the ramifications of our decisions.
I love
Right.
that.
So the example I share is because I'm in this beautiful spot in Flagstaff. A couple weekends ago, I was my dog wakes me up every morning. I'm an Australian Shepherd. She loves to go out and throw at like 5 in the morning.
That's
So I don't set
awesome.
an alarm anymore, right? Because she wakes me up. Long run day. I wanted to get up early, do my mobility, fuel, all that. The one morning in 3 months that we've been here, she doesn't wake me up. Oh, I'm so mad. I take her out. I'm mad at the dog and I'm going out and I'm throwing the ball for her, right? Well, this sucks. And long run's going to suck. And I'm doing all these things, right? So that's that first order. I didn't wake up early enough. Therefore, long run's going to suck.
Yeah.
Single variable analysis, first order decision making, et cetera, right? Throwing for her. And all of a sudden behind me, I hear, and I turn around and there's a beautiful herd of elk on the sunrise coming up 20 yards from me.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting there with my dog. I put her back on the leash. I run inside. I wake my wife up. and we stand on the porch and we have this beautiful video of elk crossing the street staring at us from like 20 yards.
Amazing.
Right. So I'm mad at my dog and I should have been like, oh, we'll see, maybe there's a benefit to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I could have just thought more positively about it. Right.
Right.
I think that's, one of the things in coaching we don't do. We look at the numbers. This workout will do this, therefore, boom. Or this athlete wants this, therefore, boom, outcome. What's the second and third order decision of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Outcome. We don't think very well of that because we don't have the experience. We want to please our athletes. We want to do whatever, right? But I always try to keep that. I'm just going to say story because I don't know what it is, but that story in mind when we're making decisions and thinking through things with athletes. And I try to give athletes that idea because when you're at the throes of type A or anything like that, you go A plus B equals C. Therefore, I must do A plus B now, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, but you got C, but at what cost? What's up
Yeah.
next,
Yeah.
right? And I think I think it's fun because I'm a nerd when it comes to this stuff. So hopefully the listeners
Yeah.
think it's yeah.
Yeah, no, again, I think it's a great perspective to have. I think to kind of wrap this up, I mean, just to make sure that I'm clear,
Yeah.
and so I think that our listeners understand. So, I mean, if I had to kind of summarize kind of everything that you've said, I mean, it's really looking at the athlete as the whole person
Yeah.
and really taking a long range perspective, a long range view on things and not such a myopic view of, like you said, A plus B equals C, therefore do C at all costs. I think it's such a healthy way to approach life, but certainly endurance athletics.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like my approach is always what's best in the long term is going to be best in the short and the medium term as well.
Mm, yeah,
There's no shortcuts, there's no cheats, there's no hacks that don't take away from the long term. And my position is like I always care about the person, the athlete, whatever, in the longest term possible, right?
yeah,
I think like even if I just remove the, eating disorder lens or the coaching lens, I actually just think that's better for humanity. If we have better people in better places over the long term, our world's in a much better place, right?
yeah,
And that encompasses a lot of things to be clear, right? But if we as coaches, if there's therapists that are listening to this as well too, if that's our approach, rather, the example is the athlete who comes to you and goes, I want to qualify for Boston now, and I'm willing to do everything singularly possible. It's like, okay, I understand that view, and maybe we get you there, but you might end up with a stress fracture, and you might be out, and you might never qualify anyways.
yeah, yeah,
Be a little patient, take it back, fall in love with running, enjoy it,
yeah,
qualify in your second one or your third one or whatever, right?
yeah.
That's the long-term approach. I've had clients just say, I'm not going to work with you if you're not going to do that. Okay?
Yeah. 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 Fair enough. And I think that, we do live in a world where everything, whether, maybe largely because of the internet or whatever, but
Yeah,
everything has to be immediate. There's always, I hate that word hack, but right.
yeah, yeah,
It's like there's a hack for everything. Or, save 5 watts on the bike by buying this $8,000 water bottle.
yeah,
There's always that thing in versus, and I think because of that, it just creates so much noise. It becomes overwhelming and everyone's doing it. And, if I want to, PR for, and qualify for Boston, I got to get those, $250 super shoes. And there is just so much noise that to be able to kind of back off from that, sit back and take that long range approach. I think it's probably easier said than done, but I think most for sure, that's certainly the right approach.
yeah. I think one of the things you can think about, nobody cheers for you when you're at the bottom. Nobody cheers for you along the way, and then they like despise you when you're at the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of the way it goes, right? And so I kind of look at it and go like, well, if that's the case anyways, I might as well take the long-term approach because if I'm going to be an overnight celebrity, if we're doing 10 years of work, whether that's an overnight Boston qualifier or whatever, I might as well do it the right way.
Yeah.
Because actually it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks because I'm the one putting the dang shoes on and running down with 10,000 of my closest friends at Boston, like sandwiched for the first 4 miles on Monday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all about you. And I think that's a great lens for people to take is like, I say this in my clinical sports psych practice all the time. You know, nobody's running those miles for you.
Yeah.
Who cares what they think?
Yeah.
You're the one
Yeah.
who's got to go out and do it, right? So,
True.
it doesn't matter, right? Like it's you in the long term and your goals, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why it's so hard sometimes for athletes to bring coaches and therapists in because we trust we have this goal. It's central to our tenet, our identity, for better or worse, I'll add.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to bring people in. That's why we have to build trust and rapport. And that's exactly what we also have to do when we're talking about these sticky, hard to talk about subjects like disordered eating
Sure.
as coaches,
Yeah.
right? So it's the same skills we have over here to work with athletes to get them faster are the same skills here, just different knowledge set.
Yeah. I love that. Brent, thank you so much for your time on this today. For our listeners that want to learn more about Brant, you can check out his website, cepmindset.com. And he is also, again, putting your coaching hat on Team Run Run, teamrunrun.com. If any of our listeners would like to purchase or learn more about our certifications, you can use code ATE75 for $75 off a US certification. So, Brandon, again, thank you so much for your time. I think you highlighted so many great things when obviously when I sent you this stuff, it was more on disordered eating. But all these podcasts, but certainly this one, I feel like I've walked away certainly having like a better understanding, not just of the eating part, but just really how to become a better coach, how to, maybe even just life skills out, honestly. So I certainly got a lot out of this personally on a selfish level. So thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you, and I hope the listeners do as well. And I'd encourage you to keep, working through your coach education. Always try to get better. Like, part of me coming and talking to you is about getting better as well too, and all those things. And I think as coaches, the more we can learn, the more reps we get. In the same way that we give more reps all the time to our athletes, right? The better we get, which means we're better for athletes. And at the end of the day, our job is to be here and serve athletes. So the better we are, the better the athletes are, the better the sport is, the better place we leave it in when we're eventually done.
Yep, completely agree. Well, thank you so much, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.